Welcome to the Mindful Path podcast with Nick Day and Harry Kalimnios.
I'm Harry, an experienced executive wellness and longevity coach, keynote speaker and author of 2 best-selling books titled The Thought Gym and Working Well.
And I'm Nick, an executive coach, founder of a multi-million-pound award-winning business, an age group international athlete, and a husband and parent to 2 beautiful children.
Despite our different lifestyles and different approaches, we share similar values, and we hope that by listening in on our conversations, we'll unearth some insights that may just help you to achieve your goals.
Perhaps you want to become a better parent, boss, colleague, friend, or perhaps you simply want to live a longer, happier, and healthier life. Well, we're here to help you to silence that inner voice of doubt that lives within us all.
As I always say, Nick, if we train the mind, the rest will follow.
Absolutely right, Harry. So let's get started. Harry, welcome back. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great, Nick. How's it going?
It's good. I'm good. I've had a good week. Yeah, I had my first one since my injury, which I think we talked about in episode 2 or 3.
You're already recovered. That's good stuff.
I wouldn't have cut it. It was a slow one and probably a little bit too soon, but I got through it. So I'm in pretty good spirits. I'll finally be able to start exercising again, which is always good for mental health. But I had something I wanted to raise with you today. An interesting question with a client of mine, funny enough, a coaching client, who was talking to me about generative AI, or for those that may or may not be familiar with ChatGPT in particular. I'll go into more context about what that conversation is about in a moment. But it brought to me an interesting topic of conversation. I wanted to bring to you, being, a mindfulness expert. You've done a lot of work on mental health. You've studied it in detail. We now know, thankfully, I think it's a good thing, certainly in the work that I do as an HR recruiter and an HR podcast as well. We talk a lot about mental health, and it's become a widespread topic. It's now in public domain. I think hopefully a lot of the stigma around mental health is not what it used to be, and people are much more confident in being confident about being vulnerable and confident raising these issues. I think there's been a big cultural change in relation to people talking openly about mental health issues. I think the qualms we had about talking publicly about such issues have kind of dissipated a certain amount. And I think a lot of that has been down to AI, because there's been an influx of apps and mindfulness tools and meditation tools and soundscapes and things we can access on our smartphones that have had a part to play in the evolution of that stigma being reduced in public domain. But I wanted to ask your view on AI, whether you use it in any of the tools that you use, whether you think it's had a positive or a negative impact on mental health.
Yeah, it's a big question. I mean, I think I would probably argue that I'm not sure it's that AI that has had the effect that you're talking about. I would say for me, firstly, the word mental health, when I was a teenager, never even heard it, right? I'd probably only heard it as an adult. And I only really think about it being thrust into the limelight, actually, personally, when bizarrely enough, Prince Harry and Prince William started talking about it about 7 years ago. And then, even then, it was not talked about by, say, politicians and things like that, I think, until the whole pandemic. I'm not sure, I believe that apps such as, Calm, Headspace have done a good job in terms of propagating this idea of mindfulness and well-being and meditation. I'm not, and obviously that's all part of mental health, but I'm not sure I would argue that AI has contributed to publicizing mental health. And what I would say, actually, if anything, I'm very suspicious of the whole thing. Call me an 80s child who grew up watching Matthew Broderick in War Games. But I suspect the problem is, for me, is that there's a bigger issue here. But I see that as humans, as part of our evolution, we're still in our infancy. So by that, I mean, if we were to define humanity as a person from birth to death, I would say that we're about 3 years old right now. And that's when you start to play with toys and you start to break things and you don't really understand what you're playing with, but you discover this new stuff. And that's where I feel we are with a lot of what we're learning, including AI, which, I've played a bit with ChatGPT. In fact, I'm going to play with it some more tomorrow. I think it's been helping me with trying to come up with a book title for the new book that I'm writing. as well as the back cover blurb. And it can be used. I mean, it's like many things, right? It can be used for good or not, depending. I think ultimately it's going to have a massive part to play, right, in every aspect of the working world. Even the other day, I was chatting to a colleague of mine, and she's a speaking coach, and she was working with a client who was looking at, I'm not sure if it was ChatGPT or some other AI system, who were to kind of help people with their public speaking skills. And it pitted her against the AI to analyze a speech. And it did quite a good job, apparently, of picking up all the, how much of a percentage of that conversation was pausing versus not, and other things. But what it did miss was, which I think it still can't replicate and replace at the moment, is more of the emotive part and the emotion and the personality part.
It's the humans that contextualize information. I don't think robots have got the ability yet to contextualize. But for those, just for clarification, for those that may or may not be familiar, and it'd be surprising how many people aren't familiar yet with generative AI things out there. So that's what ChatGPT is, a generative AI platform. It's effectively an AI interactive system, a chatbot that is actively and avidly being used for people to ask questions of it. And it's a language-based AI platform that gives responses back based on all the information it has access to. And that's where people are using it now and there's many ways people are using it, but one of those ways is to ask for mental health advice, for example. Now that wasn't why ChatGPT was created, but you can use it for that method, just like you can in the example you gave to help you with public speaking or to help you create a book title. It's a language model that has access to millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of data points that can come back and give you a relatively intelligent response. So because of that, people are using it now to ask their mental health related questions, and it's coming back with pretty intelligent answers, but it's whether or not we can rely upon that information. Where it comes from. I think bringing it back to the app-based question, I think the openness that we've experienced towards mental health has definitely allowed for an emergence of more relevant smartphone AI-related apps. So I do think there's been a response from the providers, the developers out there to the phenomenon being more widely accepted or talked about in public, in public, shall I say? But are the smartphone apps also driving society to be more upfront about their mental health? I think potentially they are as a response. I think something is worth, from my perspective, you may disagree on this, but mental health is something we all have. The stigma has been associated with mental health as it being a negative thing. You go back, you said you're an 80s child. Well, when I grew up as an 80s child, I would be thinking of, think mental health. You think of someone in a straitjacket in a room, trying to get out of an asylum. And, some terrible, terrible terms used to exist of he's at the funny farm or all these kind of things that used to exist out there. When the reality is all of us have mental health. It's the health of our mind, our brains, it's whether or not we are struggling with negative mental health or
whether it's ill mental health, mental illness or mental,
or mental illness as well, which is something completely different.
That's totally different. Right. And I think the stats are like, I don't know whether it's in any given month or any given week, 1 in 4 of us will suffer from mental health issues. But the reality is it could be 1 in 1 of us, really, because I think 100% of us do. And I remember it being illustrated once at a speech that, if you were to sprain your ankle or something like that, one, it's more visible, right? That you have a physical injury, but also you're more likely to sort of say, I'm not going to play football today because I've got a sprained ankle, right? As opposed to, I'm not going to come into work today because, I'm feeling a bit down or whatever the thing might be. It is definitely changed. I've noticed a massive shift in the last 5 years. Now, I think that's been societal, but obviously because I work in certain spaces, you are sometimes at the mercy of being in a bit of an echo chamber where you feel like, everyone knows about mental health and everyone knows about meditation. Everyone knows about breath work, and actually they don't, by and large, because it's not, it talks about. However, when I do catch glimpses of the news or papers or things like that, I'm seeing more of that propagate. I guess, do I think that the apps have helped that along? I think it's I guess the apps have demonstrated the need because, for example, if you've got, something like Headspace then gets downloaded millions of times, then the data and the numbers are showing that there's a requirement, right? That there's a reason people are downloading this. So in that respect, it's definitely helped. And then people have obviously seen these things are more and more.
But that's not necessarily associated with mental illness. That's because people want to take a proactive approach to positive mental health. I think that's a real positive change that we've seen. Is
it proactive or is it reactive? I feel like most people that are turning towards things like Headspace and Calm are doing it to solve a current issue that they might have, right? Whether that's stress, whether that's not being able to switch off at night, whether that's,
That's interesting. I don't know the data on this. You may know more than me. I would say that most people, maybe I'm talking about from my own personal, way of using these apps, it's always been nothing to do with those reasons. It's because I want to be proactive about being more mindful, making space for me. You always ask me, are you still meditating, Nick? Are you still trying that? I like to try new things. I want to try and be a better.
But that's your personality. You're similar to me in that regard. And that's probably what's driven you towards things like coaching and everything else, is that you're actively always looking to have self-improvement and improve yourself. And for me, the way I came to, I guess, these mental health tools, if you want to call them that, like meditation and mindfulness and anything else, is because not necessarily I felt I needed them, but because I saw other high performing people and they were talking about it and doing it. In fact, actually, I was watching, Ted Lasso. I don't know if you ever watched Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso.
Yeah, Ted Lasso.
Love it. One of the best things I've ever seen on television. And his view on life is just fantastic.
It's brilliant. My dad is addicted to it as well. Anyway, so I'm watching series 3 with my folks at the moment, and we watched the latest episode where they've got Zava, the big footballer, right? And he's sat there before one of the games with all the rest of the crew, and he's doing like meditation and things. And I was saying to my mum, because my mum's still a bit kind of thinking about meditation as being sticking your head in the sand and ignoring everything. I'm like, look, they've even got it here as like high performing people, like athletes have always been, not always, but have been doing meditation, like high performing CEOs, they've been doing this for a long time. Jerry Seinfeld, for example, I'm sure he's been meditating, I think, for about 25, 30 years, right? People have been meditating for 30, 40 years. And it's only recently that you're starting to hear about this because it's kind of coming out of the closet a little bit more.
It's new because I don't know what year it was. I should do as a football fan. And the year that Glenn Hoddle was the England manager and he brought in these experts, Eileen.
Yeah. That was when he was for the World Cup, and he was ridiculous.
He was massively criticised for it. It was quite new age then to have anyone come in and look at the mind side of performance. We now know it's hugely important, and you've got experts here, performance experts, working on the mind in all.
Well, this is the thing, is that it was only, I think he when he was out, the next person that came in, I think maybe it was Sven-Goran Eriksson after him. I'm not sure if it was or not. But then he brings in, I'm pretty sure it's Sven-Goran Eriksson that brought Steve Peters in, didn't he? Or did someone else?
Yeah, quite possibly. He was quite forward thinking.
Yeah, so Steve Peters, for those who don't know, wrote quite a popular book called The Chimp Paradox, which is effectively, talking about similar stuff that I'm sure Glenn Hoddle's guru was talking about. I'm not sure, but maybe did it in a bit more of a scientific, less woo-woo way. But suddenly that became more accepted. I guess he was getting the results as well, with Ronnie O'Sullivan.
That's also what it comes down to, right?
And Chris Hoy and people like that, the British cycling team. So he had that reputation anyway. But, if you go back, I don't know, you're obviously you familiar with Phil Jackson from the Chicago Bulls? Yeah,
I am indeed. Yeah, I've read some of his stuff as well. He's on. Yeah,
exactly. So he, for those of you who don't know, he's, I think, now won 11 championship rings as a coach and 2 as a player in the NBA, 6 with the Chicago Bulls and 5 with the Los Angeles Lakers. But he famously brought in lots of ideas to the Chicago Bulls of the 1990s, such as Zen Buddhism and meditation and mindfulness and different teachers to help the people like Dennis Rodman and Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan.
Didn't he co-write The Mindful Athlete?
He didn't co-write it. He might have written the foreword for it. But George Mumford was the coach that Phil Jackson had brought in to help people like Michael Jordan and so on. But it's a great book, The Mindful Athlete. So what my point being that a lot of this stuff has been there in the shadows for a long, long time. I think with both the internet, possibly apps as well, the proliferation of these ideas has become more commonplace.
Let's talk about something. You mentioned a couple of things here that I want to pick up on. So one, as you mentioned earlier, there's a phrase that I love because I think it's something many people don't really consider that we do, and yet most of us do it. You use the word an echo chamber. And for those not familiar, this is kind of the idea that we search for things that we want to find the answers for. We already have an idea of what our view is. So you find things that reinforce that idea, and you continually do that. So you're constantly in that echo chamber of, if you've got a political viewpoint, the chances are you'll find out and seek out articles that support that view rather than go against it. And of course, that reaffirms your view every time you read another article that supports your version. So you end up getting more and more politicized because and that's an extreme example, but that's kind of thing we're talking about. If we think about this in terms of mental health, I mean, the original apps, as I remember them, were really just kind of search engines. You'd use the app. If you had a problem, it would search the internet for an answer and come back with, use your sprained ankle earlier. I think I've hurt my ankle. I'll use this app to help me find out what I've done wrong. You search, you write in what your symptoms are. It comes up with a range of things it could be and potential recoveries, ice it, rest it, whatever. And they were kind of done in that form. I think where it suddenly shifted with the emergence of generative AI like ChatGPT is now you can have an interactive dialogue with these places. So I can say to them, I'm thinking like this, and it'll come back with a response. But where I think it might be quite dangerous. Now, make no mistake, there are a lot of benefits of generative AI if used intelligently and wisely, but it's only as good as the prompts that you give it. And that's the thing that people often forget. And that's why there's potentially going to be a huge emergence of prompt managers and prompt directors and the people that know how to prompt these generative AI machines better than others. And there's a skill involved here. But if you think about it from layman's terms, if we have an issue, we're going to write into these apps, this generative AI, using ChatGPT as an example, what our potential problem is, with the only view that we have, which is our own. And then we're going to continue down what I would call a potential rabbit hole in the way that we prompt it to give responses. The AI is only going to ever respond to the question we give it. It's not going to attempt to challenge our thinking. It's not going to attempt to contextualize where might this be going. You could write in there, for example, I'm struggling with this and I think I might do something drastic, and I'm quite deliberately not going where that could be. But actually, the generative AI won't understand the difference between right and wrong, and it will just give you the tools you need to take that kind of drastic action potentially. And I think that's what could be really dangerous, because it could act as an echo chamber for an individual that is suffering from mental illness. And I wonder then, because it's so vast, it's not limited by specific boundaries that perhaps a mindfulness app may have.
Well, yeah.
Could that be quite dangerous? What's your view?
I guess my view is, I largely agree with what you said. I think my view is this not just a further symptom of where we are struggling in society in general? Because if we're having to turn to artificial intelligence to satisfy some basic human needs, such as effectively what you're saying is connection, that's what it's satisfying in that moment. We are making, again, we're putting a band-aid on a deeper issue. It just reminds me of this movie. I remember watching it with Arnold Schwarzenegger, The Sixth Day. Have you seen The Sixth Day?
No, I do know you've watched some terrible, terrible movies. This is becoming very apparent.
It's one of his quite good movies, actually, Arnold Schwarzenegger's good movies. But anyway, in that, his colleague has effectively like a virtual girlfriend at home, right? She's some sort of hologram of some sort, whatever.
You're definitely selling it.
So she's programmed to, just, I guess, have a conversation with him and whatever else. And I kind of somewhat relate to some degree, because I live by myself, right? You've got wife, kids and everything. So you have that constant interaction. I don't. And I remember watching a couple of days ago, someone had programmed ChatGPT, or somehow done something, and they've got some virtual hologram on like a picture frame, and was literally having a conversation with this little puppy or dog, was like humanizing the response to them. And I thought, on one hand, that's great. And then on the other hand, I thought that's also terrifying. And they're both equally true, I think, for me, because on the one hand, it would actually be quite nice. Sometimes you come in and you chat to someone on your terms, and, you know, you turn them off when you don't want to, but then that's not real life either, right? Because in a family, for example, you know, you're going to have conversations when really you do want to just switch off. And I just feel like we're entering into a more and more isolated stage of existence, where we're relying more and more on less human interaction and more artificial.
I think you raise a really important point, actually, and I hadn't really thought about it in this context until you raised it right now, which is, you know, you made a distinction of where we're different. You live alone, and I've got a family, two kids, who I love dearly, and there's a concern here as a parent. There's a concern here for everybody, but this is why it suddenly resonated with what you've just mentioned. Programs like ChatGPT are clearly not, in my opinion, a viable option for anyone looking for any form of therapy or diagnosis or anything like that. They're just not. And there's a reason for that as well. I think we've got to a point in society, and we talk about this a lot on with HR. I talk about this on my other show with HR leaders, about how it's an amazing thing that people are now talking openly about things like mental health. We've come an awful long way. This has evolved massively. The stigmas that's attached to the term mental health hopefully are starting to be removed. And I think that's really, really positive. But all of that comes from, and this is related to the point you've just made about communication and community and social interaction. But I am terrified now that with the emergence of tools like generative AI, and unfortunately my kids don't have access to this, but they will have in the future, because the future is here and it's coming, and the more of these tools are going to be produced, and they'll be at different age groups, and you can't control it. It's a beast. But the idea that my son or my daughter might ask an AI platform like ChatGPT an answer to a very delicate mental related issue that could impact their mental health, instead of being open and coming to me or mummy in this instance, I think that's frightening. At the moment, the first point of call for them, if they've got an issue, would be to come to me, and there's a trust there and there's an openness. But we all know, whether you've been bullied in the playground, and for those that have been through this kind of experience, and in anything, whether you're an alcoholic or whether you've recovering from drug misuse, whatever it might be, one of the hardest things to do is to talk about it. And actually, they say often that's the first part of solving some of these major issues that we have to deal with. If we believe that talking about it is talking to a generative AI instead of talking to humans and having that social interaction, then potentially it could really undo a lot of the really, really good work that's been done to make these stigmas go away and to talk openly about it. Because if we make it too easy for people to try and find what they believe is a simple solution by entering these echo chambers and trying to find results that aren't verified and probably play around with all kinds of mental health ethics and all everything else, but it's easy. Question I would ask you, Harry, and I'd be interested to get your view on it, is, should I be worried as a parent? Because will it mean that my kids potentially stop asking me because it's easier? If my daughter suddenly goes for mental health, eating disorder, maybe she's worried about something, with all the social media pressures that you have out there as a teenager, I would like to think she'd come to me if she's got a problem and we could talk about it openly. But maybe these tools prevent that kind of discourse from taking place in the future.
I don't know whether the tools themselves prevent it, because if I'm honest, I think that's a challenge, like of teenagers talking to parents openly about any of their emotions and feelings has been a challenge since the dawn of time. And you were always back in the day going to find the information out in other ways rather than talking to your parents. I'm sure like lots of teenagers found out their information through reading Cosmopolitan magazine, right? That's certainly what my sisters used to read when they were growing up, or the Ask Agony Aunt kind of column, or now it's more social media, right? So they're like looking at different social media things. They're going to do all that anyway, now, and they always did, but just in other forms rather than talking to parents openly. I guess what I was thinking is that what I did as a teenager, I never spoke to my parents really about any of this stuff that was going on in my head. I did write a lot of it down though, and I still have those books now. From the age of about 10, I was writing, and quite a lot through my teenage years. There was a lot going on then, but none of that. I mean, and as a guy, we're not known to be open with our emotions and our feelings and chatting to people about things so much, maybe more so now, but certainly back then. And so I wrote a lot of it down. Now, writing things down actually has been shown to be maybe as effective or even more effective than talking to someone about a problem. And why might that be? Well, the reason is because sometimes when you talk to someone, you may end up, getting advice that you don't need, or it might be that you're, they're kind of, I guess, reinforcing what you already are talking about. Whereas when you write it down and you reflect, it's slightly different. You don't have that sounding board to come off. And so I think sometimes it's shown it's more effective. Now, the challenge with the AI stuff is that obviously it's not one way, right? So
it can respond. Yeah.
You got write stuff down and it will respond. I feel like it's just replacing what's maybe potentially already there, right? Whether that was like the agony aunt in the column, which obviously is a human, but still it's an anonymous person that's writing in.
With a generalized response.
Yeah, exactly. So you're still getting it. So there was still a problem then. So I think it's just replicating the problems, but it's just making it more accessible to more people. So my honest view, and the more I go down this rabbit hole of technology and AI, the more I see, I'm going to sound a lot like a Luddite in a bit. And I do see the irony in what I'm about to say, since I'm on Zoom right now on a laptop. We're releasing this on apps.
And you've been using ChatGPT to help you with your book title today.
Yeah. And I just feel more and more as I see the younger and younger generations as well growing up with this sort of technology, that it's, and I'm saying this to someone, I think overall it's a net negative for younger people. I think overall for society, technology, the internet, like the availability of knowledge worldwide is a net positive. But I would say for overall, my overarching opinion is that for young people, probably like, 20 or less, it's a net negative.
I mean, it's a big question because, in the work I do, there's massive benefits to this. I think in the context of our conversation about the mind and mindful paths and things that can take it, I have concerns about the power of the way that generative AI like ChatGPT could be used in a mental health context. For me, it's just not a viable option to be used. I think you gave a great, for those purposes yet. Maybe that will change. Who knows what the future brings. But at the moment, it concerns me. It would concern me if my kids or my friend was using, as people are, because you can Google this, there's a lot of information about people trying to utilize things like ChatGPT as a replacement for paid therapy. And, as a coach myself, I'm alarmed at that. I'm not a therapist, but I'd be alarmed if someone tried to use it to replace what a human can do, which is contextualize and listen actually without always responding and just ask further questions. ChatGPT is going to give you an answer. It won't necessarily prompt you to say what else, what's really bothering, what's actually below your behind your body language that you're giving me. I think that there's a concern there for me. But just bringing it back to your point about journaling, which I think you raised before, hugely powerful tool. It's stood the dawn of time, right? So we're talking about lots of fads that come in and go. Journaling's been there since many, many years. People write things down that have worked. It brings into context something you mentioned in a previous episode about the power of a gratitude diary and actually how much it's done for you, writing down the things that you're grateful for and over a period of time, how much of a positive impact they can have. As you know, I love my parables and I wrote it down because I thought it was really interesting. I would not have written this down without your example, by the way, about the gratitude diary. So I thought you might like this. I'll bring it to today's thing and I'll mention it to you. The story was a Buddhist monk was walking to another city. I can't recall where it was, but it was protected by gates. There's a soldier guarding the gates that interrogated him. And he said, "Who are you? Where are you going? And why are you going there?" And the monk grew pensive and asked the soldier, "Can I ask you a question too?" And the soldier says, what is it? And the soldier sort of wondered and aggressively sort of came towards him. And the monk said, what do you earn for 1 week's work? And the soldier says, 2 baskets of rice. The monk responds, I will bring you 4 baskets if you ask me these questions every day. And I thought that is so true to what you were saying. Who are you? Where are you going? And why are you going there? And I don't know, it brought the context of the journaling, the gratitude diary, those things, the power of
self-inquiry.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think it related to, we had a question about what our poisons are and things in people's episodes, and check them out. You'll sort of bring a lot of this into context, but also the context, as you said there, of not always answering back, having these questions for ourselves and helping our own selves find the answers to these poignant questions to help us in direction. A guy called Michael Neal, who's a coach that I massively respect. Yeah. He won't know it, but I've read a lot of his work. He comes up with something that I tell my clients about, which is this. He said, it's something called the lamppost metaphor. If we could go outside and everyone spoke to a lamppost for 30 minutes a day, the world would be in a much better place. Now, the lamppost can't respond to you either. It's just the idea of us talking to somebody or something, just talking openly and not listening to our inner voices, but having our external voices, listening to the sound of those words, listening to how we sound when we say something out loud. If you all did that for 30 minutes a day, how helpful it could be. Yeah.
This is another reason why pets are so useful.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah. Great example. As someone that has 2 dogs, absolutely. Talk, those that have pets, talk to them all the time.
Talk to them all the time, right? There was an interesting, not surprising to be honest, but experiment I remember reading about years ago where they took like stressed out city folk and, they measured all that things like cortisol levels, etc. and a self-reflective, stress questionnaire. And they gave them dogs for, I think 6 weeks or 8 weeks to sort of see how they get on. And then they, at the end of the 6 or 8 weeks, stress levels had plummeted. They're feeling much happier. Yeah. And none of them wanted to give the dogs back. So I think they all got to keep the dogs in the end as well.
Amazing.
Part of it's to do with obviously having to get out and walk them like a couple of times a day. Part of it's to do with physical touch, which is something I talk about and people didn't really figure out until the pandemic. I've been talking about it for about 10 years, just how important physical touch is. And then part of it is going to be the conversation as well, right? And being able to talk.
Part of it's got to be the welcome they give you. It's exactly. The best part of their day.
Yeah, no, I was cycling home just now and I saw this cutest little dog and he was like, it reminded me of the dog from, the movie The Mask with Jim Carrey back in the 90s, that kind of little white with
I love your movie references. I love them.
I just remember, cause I don't know the type of dog that is, but it's a small dog and it looked like Milo from The Mask. And he was like jumping up and there's this little old lady walking him. And I was like, cause normally I've always thought I wanted a dog and I wanted like a cockapoo or a cavapoo. But then I saw this one. I was like, actually, that was a really kind of cute dog as well. I'd kind of go for one of those, but I've often thought for my own mental health, it would be, and I've been talking about it for about a year or two, but, probably 3 years talking about a dog. I haven't yet got one just because I feel like along with the benefits comes the extra responsibility and, having to not be away from them for too long, which would be a challenge for me personally because I'm out and about a lot. But I've often thought that I'd probably be a little bit happier with a dog, maybe overall.
It's not always positive. We've got a puppy at the minute and it's, it's literally defecating all over the house. It's a form of stress, point of stress at the moment. She's driving us up the wall. I'm as cute as she is. It's a little mini Dachshund. So luckily the defecation is relatively tiny in comparison to our other dog, who's 15 and a half years old. I'm worried we're going to be, he's going to go inconstant at just the time as he's, we'll get her trained and the other one will start. So they can drive you up the wall as well. But I like the idea where, and you'll know, I've said this for many years, but it's, your day doesn't dictate your mood dictates your day. And I think for me, if you've got a dog, they're always so positive. Mm. Their mindset of just seeing you being the best part of their day and forgetting whatever they've been in a cage for the last hour, or maybe they've been, unattended or whatever. It's instantly forgotten when they see you. And they're so happy. Their day has not been ruined by the fact they've been neglected for the last hour or whatever they've been doing, because they're not letting their day dictate their mood. Their mood dictates their day by seeing you. They're just happy. It's that holding on to all those negative thoughts or things that we have as humans, because we are so much more complex in that sense.
I'll have to share with you afterwards, if you've not already seen it, the little thing that goes on the internet is like cat diary versus dog diary. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I haven't.
I have to share it with you, but it was like, cat diary, right? So dog diary goes something like this, right? My owner rubbed my belly, my favorite thing. My owner took me for a walk, my favorite thing. I was given food.
I love it already.
Thing. And then cat diary is like day 839 of my captivity. These humans are like, I tried to kill one of them the other day by walking in between its legs at the top of the stairs, and it just patted me and thought I was cute. And then it talks about the dog being like a traitor and something like that.
I love it already.
Bringing it back to, like things like AI and ChatGPT is you've obviously, I'm sure, and dogs as well, to kind of link it together. All the kind of robot type dogs that they kind of developing, and robot pets and AI pets that, we used to have those Tamagotchis, wasn't it, back in the day?
I remember Tamagotchi, yeah. If you didn't feed it, a tiny machine would die and whatever, yeah.
And again, it just goes, for me, I can see a bigger picture with all of this stuff, is that we're trying to use technology ultimately to replicate the natural order of things in some way, shape or form, right? So we're using AI to have our conversations instead of have that with the person. We're using, Zoom to have meetings rather than in person. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, these are, we wouldn't be able to have this otherwise, right? Because you're all the way in like Devon and I'm in London. But the more and more we skew towards this, the more it reminds me of just a very isolated and lonely future that we could be heading towards if we embrace these without thinking too much. And actually, I was listening to Joe Rogan podcast earlier, and they were talking about AI, and Joe Rogan was mentioned how he was on the text to Elon Musk the day before about some of this stuff. But Elon Musk has suggested like a 6-month freeze, let's say, on any of this AI business and development, just so we can take stock and breathe and maybe come up and formulate some kind of best practice, best way or something like that. Because I think we are so excited about a new technology. It's like I say, we are infants when it comes to our evolution.
I like that. I like that idea. We're just starting to play with our toys.
We're just starting to play with it. And we have no idea how these things work. And we're just breaking things and running before we can walk, really. And I think that's where we're going to be for a few hundred years, if I'm honest. I think, it's going to take a few hundred years.
AI, I'm a massive fan. I drive a Tesla, so I drive an electric car, bringing Elon Musk in. So the AI involved in that is amazing. But there's AI in everything we do. We're looking at Netflix. It knows what shows we like and what we watch next. That's AI. The phones that we use, the anything that has smart in the title is using some form of AI to deliver that smart capability. There are people using robot hoovers, which actually is incredibly complex robotics and AI involved in those kind of things. It managed to learn where to go and map your room and not where not to go. And AI is incredibly impressive. I think where the concern comes in, and like everything, there's always concern where there's lack of knowledge or understanding, and we resist it. And I'm definitely in that camp a little bit at the minute. This is the first kind of form of AI where it can respond to you rather than just do what we want it to do in a different kind of context. So I think that's slightly concerning for me in terms of the way that's used. I think we're referencing it to what you mentioned there in the Joe Rogan podcast. I haven't listened to it, but whether we need a gap, the reason this has suddenly exploded in the public domain is because I think things like ChatGPT, we're on version 4 now, right? So when it hit the market, I think it hit the market at version 2 or version 3. But what I mean is it wasn't the first iteration of it. It's been around for about 5 years, but it's been confined to the select few in that world. And they just dropped it on the masses. And it's the widespread adoption of this technology has been around for years. It just hasn't been around for public consumption in the way that it has. And it suddenly became open source and it's gone, whoa, everyone's just gone, wow. And we've hit it. So I don't know what the answer is. I think we just need to act with a little bit of caution. If you listen to this and you're using it to solve issues that go beyond the confines or boundaries of what it's designed for, just be cautious. I think, it's not a therapist. It hasn't got the training. It'll be utilizing resources that may or may not have been verified. If you're using it to write articles, you may well be plagiarizing someone else's work. That work may not be accurate. It's like going to Wikipedia and assuming everything on Wikipedia is fact. It's not.
I mean, look, I think with AI, and again, I don't reference any specific movie, but you watch any science fiction movie in the future. Sometimes
please reference one, because I love your references. I've never heard.
I can't think of what I'm referencing, but I'm just saying that you sometimes see like the kind of the cop talking to like an AI therapist or something like that. And so I feel like AI, I remember when I read the guy who wrote Sapiens, in one of his other books, he talks about how AI is going to effectively replace every job, right? Except for possibly archaeology, right? So archaeology is safe as a career, but every other job pretty much can be replaced with AI. And already we're seeing that with ChatGPT and being able to write marketing copy with ChatGPT, write essays for undergraduate level using it. And actually it won't be that long before, people are using it as you described, right? For therapy and counseling and coaching. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess as it evolves, time will tell, because it gives more accessibility to more people to be able to maybe imagine if your wisdom was able to be replicated 1,000-fold. Yeah. And then you'd be able to reach more people. Now, of course, you don't have the context and you don't have the nuance, but is that better than nothing? I don't know. So look, the question is, this is going to happen where AI is going to permeate through every aspect of society, just like the internet has, right? And, the internet is now being used for everything. Right. You can't think of anything that isn't really being maybe touched by the internet, like career wise. And the same thing will happen with AI. Does that then make us obsolete, right? As humans, because AI can suddenly take over most jobs? Maybe in the jobs that we're currently doing, but there'll always hopefully be somewhere into.
This is in a field that I know well, which is recruitment, right? And I did a podcast, an HR podcast with a guy called Jeff Wald, who wrote the book, The End of Jobs. The rise of on-demand workers and agile corporations. And I did that podcast, I think, back in 2018. So that book will be 2018. But at that point, I think there was also a Deloitte-funded study that was published by the BBC, which actually, I mean, you can still find it. It ranked all the jobs that would likely be made redundant by automation, which was the buzzword at the time there rather than AI, by 2025. We're 2023 now. Now, I operate in my recruitment business in the world of HR and payroll. And they said then that the 97% of all HR and payroll positions would be automated by 2025. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
It doesn't happen.
And I think there's an element where for media headlines, we like to catastrophize. Yeah. We like to say this is going to happen.
Oh yeah.
I think there's reality. AI is absolutely going to replace jobs, but it'll displace a lot as well. And where the old jobs go, new jobs are formed. And I mentioned earlier about the idea of being prompt managers or prompt directors. These are new jobs created by AI as well. Yeah. I think I can't get the exact stats, but there was a European forum study that was announced. I think the numbers were something along the lines of 57 million jobs would be no longer be in existence by 2025, but they'd be replaced by 87 million new ones, which gives you a net difference of sort of best part of 30 million new jobs coming into the market. So, you can look at it with I'm definitely a glass half full kind of guy anyway, right? But there's two ways of looking.
There'll definitely be these new jobs. I feel like these new jobs though will be us managing higher and higher levels. What do I mean by that? It means that as we start, okay, you like movies, right? Going back to movies, right? So
you like movies.
Well, I like movies, but you like me referencing movies. But
I do.
The Matrix movies, right? So the original, the second or third one, where the leader of the Zion place is talking to Neo. And he's showing how the pumps work, or he's showing the pumps that breathe air into Zion and give life to Zion. And he's talking to him, and he says, "Well, do you know how these work?" And Neo's like, "No." And the guy says, "Like, neither do we, right? We don't, right?" And And it reminded me that as we start to allow AI and automation to take care of the nitty gritty, if you like, and we start taking the higher and higher level responsibilities, we're going to know less and less about how things actually work. Like, for example, if you went back in time 1,000 years and you were asked, and you were to tell someone 1,000 years ago all about, there's this thing called the internet and electricity and all that, you wouldn't have a clue. Most likely, the average person, right?
They wouldn't have been of interest either, because their role would be, they were living in a world of scarcity. They're thinking about, I need to get food on the table and hunt.
But you wouldn't be able to explain how it works, though. How does electricity work? You would be like, I don't know. I just turn a switch and
I think I could explain it now, Harry.
No, I don't know. I could fully, right? And I did a science, right? But we are going to know less and less about those things because they're going to be taken over by other things. Which I guess is fine because we're going to have other things that we need to worry about.
Well, we lose the skill of the doing, but we gain skills in strategic thinking and broader thinking in other areas potentially.
Well, the reason I bring this up is because I feel like, and this might be going to me catastrophizing, is that I think ultimately we're knowing less and less about fundamentals of how to be a human. What do I mean? Like if the apocalypse came tomorrow, right? How many people could really forage for food or skin an animal or, build a shelter or find water or do anything that actually requires our survival? I mean, we'd adapt and we'd probably have to learn, but I feel like, they'd know how to take a selfie of them struggling to find water, but they wouldn't know how to actually find the water themselves. Right. And I feel like we are becoming, you talked about smart stuff before, and I've always joked, right? The smarter the homes get, the smarter the technology gets, the dumber the person, right? Smartphone, dumb person. And I feel like the smarter things are getting, the dumber we are. I mean, I remember growing up, I would know about 30 of my mates' telephone numbers off by heart. No problem. Right? I don't even know my mum's telephone number right now, her mobile phone number, or anyone's really, just mine. So back in the day when I would be traveling, I would effectively learn the route I needed to take by looking at the map, because I didn't want to bring the map out when you're walking in a strange city because it's an obvious sign that you're a tourist, right? So I would learn all these things and I would know exactly where I wanted to go. And my memory was, I've always prided myself on having quite a good memory, like memorizing all the numbers. I memorized hundreds of quotes for my A-level languages and hundreds of equations for my science A-levels and degrees. And I just feel that as we're relying more and more and more on this technology, we don't need to remember stuff because the stuff's there. But are we also losing some ability of critical thinking, of
we lose the ability to think for ourselves.
Exactly. And I
totally agree.
I think that people are becoming, and I might be a bit biased here because I saw something online the other day which just made me laugh. But it was a guy going around and he was asking some really simple questions to people in America. I think it was I think it was in America, in Times Square or somewhere. And he would be asking things like, okay, so which country do you think the Queen of England's from? Or what country?
I think I've seen the same. I think I've seen the same.
No idea. They were like, Africa. I'm like, And I was just thinking, I mean, obviously this is, edited and like, I'm sure there was lots of different responses, but I just feel like as we become less and less, more and more adept at this technology, we're becoming less and less adept at our own.
I'd agree. And there's a danger of it being a self-fulfilling prophecy that as we become less able to think for ourselves, it makes us more reliant to go to technology to find the answers. So it becomes self-fulfilling. The less we learn, the more we need to go elsewhere to get the responses we need, which draws us in, of course, to generative AI. It draws us into ChatGPT. We lose the ability to think for ourselves. We lose the ability to retain knowledge because it's no longer needed. Our brain doesn't, our bodies are so good at adapting. It thinks, I don't need to retain this because I can go and find it tomorrow on ChatGPT. I don't need to, so it won't store it. And I think therefore becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's go on.
Oh, well, I was going to say, and maybe that's fine because actually we don't need to be memory banks as such, but we do need to understand, principles. This is what I think I might have mentioned it before in an earlier conversation, but when I'm talking to people, like my mum trying to explain technology to her, I'm trying to say, don't focus on the process, focus on the principles. So I want to teach her principles of technology rather than like, so if she wants to do a certain thing on technology, right? I don't know, find a new menu or whatever. I don't want to tell her how to do that because she won't remember. But if I teach her principles, like, for example, you know, usually if like you press and hold on a smartphone, maybe another option might come up or it might highlight something. Usually if there's 3 dots, it means there's another menu behind there. Usually if you make a commit to an action, you usually have a cancel option. If you understand principles rather than the actual how to do things, you become a lot more comfortable with using the technology. And I feel like a lot of people are not on that. They don't quite understand the principles of things, and they're more into. I
think you brought it full circle, which is an interesting way. I'm conscious of our listeners of time as well. I think we've been in a really interesting conversation. Certainly has been for me on ChatGPT. I don't know, you know, I'm interested to see where it takes us, but you raised a couple of things. Interestingly, you talked about the apocalypse. Apocalypse came tomorrow. Will we know where to get our water from? No, we'd know how to take a selfie. And there may be a lot of people listening to this going, well, that's okay, right? We don't need to worry about where we get our water from. But you use the apocalypse example, and no, we don't need it until we do. It's a bit like it's not a problem until it is. And therefore we need to take actions to prevent whatever that problem might be from becoming a problem. So that's why you take preventative action. And by the same token, it works the other way. We don't need to know where to get water from until we do. And we don't know what the future holds. We're in an economic climate of turmoil, of destruction, of war, of political uncertainty, of what's the word I'm looking for, of climate change, and of all these things, right? I just think it's important we all keep a sense of self and a sense of awareness of of how we do things and the information that actually we may not need to retain it. It can just be helpful to do so anyway. You know, just taking a slightly different approach, mindful approach really, to some of the tools that we have access to, and being aware that it might be good to understand why we need that information rather than just always rely on getting it. It's a bit like when you used the GPS example earlier, right? And I'm sure most people have been in this situation where you go somewhere and suddenly, for whatever reason, you run out of signal, your battery goes dead, or your sat nav stops working, and suddenly we were completely lost.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to, and this has been an episode of me quoting lots of films, but I want to throw another one at you just to kind of finish off.
Go on, it's a great way to finish the show.
Now it's not necessarily a brilliant film, but I think it highlights.
Well, most of the ones you mentioned aren't, so that's.
It's called. Have you heard of this one? It's about 2004. It came out, called Idiocracy.
No, I don't think I have.
So Idiocracy. Let me just to highlight what it's about. So it's the actors. I think it's Clive Wilson. So
I love Clive Wilson. So maybe I'll have to watch this one.
Yeah. So he's an army guy and he's not doing very well. So he's been put in some sort of basement somewhere to look at the records. And his way of getting out of the basement is he volunteers for this experimental program. This experimental program puts him in a cryo freeze for 12 months. Now, during that 12-month period that he's in the cryo freeze, I know they lose funding, it gets mothballed, whatever. And so he ends up being frozen for like 500 years and he wakes up 500 years later. And first thing he sees is in some guy's apartment. And this is how stupefied the people have become. And he's sitting in this big chair and the chair's got everything he needs, like the big gulp drink. He's got a toilet in the chair. He's got 6 screens. He's playing computer games on one screen and watching TV on another. And what happened is that all the smart people from 500 years ago, they were, waiting for the right time to get married and waiting a bit longer for having kids and all that. So then they became too old to have kids. So then all the people that were sitting at home watching crappy daytime TV ended up like having like lots of kids and the population became them. And he looks outside the window and like the buildings are falling down, but they're kind of stuck together with duct tape because no one has got any engineering skills. He goes to the doctor with a condition and the doctor is like, trying to find the right button to like push based on the symptoms he has to give him the diagnosis. So he's not actually assessing the person. He's just trying to say, what box do you fit in that I can press the button? And, and the guy actually ends up being the genius because none of the plants are growing. They're all starving to death because none of the plants are growing. And they're saying, I don't understand why the grass isn't growing and the plants aren't growing. We're giving them everything they need, right? And they're watering it with like Gatorade or something like that. And he's like, I think if we just gave them water, it'd be all right. It ends up being like the smartest person on the planet. And it was a tricky movie to watch because it's so bad, but it took me about 3 years to watch it because I watched half of it 1 year. Then
Harry, kudos where it's due. I haven't seen it. I'm definitely going to go and watch this before we next meet. I think that if it's the show that I've just visualized in my mind, I love Clive Wilson anyway. That sounds like a perfect example of what we've been talking about.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's what we're heading towards.
Bang on, nailed it.
This was only 20 years ago. This movie.
There you go. I'm going to check it out. And my favorite movie, I think, that he did was Drill Bit Taylor, which is not worth mentioning. It just made me laugh.
I've seen that, yeah.
Probably a good place to leave the show. Listen, Harry, it's been a real pleasure. I think we're going to meet next week. We're going to talk about your beat model. It'll be your leadership beat model. So I'm excited to get into that. But listen, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you again in 7 days' time.
Absolutely. Pleasure as always.
That brings us to the end of today's episode of Mindful Paths. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and found some valuable insights to help you on your journey, whatever that may be.
Remember, your thoughts don't mean anything until you give them meaning.
And as we've said before, mastering your mindset is a continuous journey, not a destination.
If you found this episode helpful, please consider leaving us a review.
And remember to subscribe to our podcast on your preferred podcast platform so you never miss a future episode.
Thank you for listening. I'm Harry Kalimnios.
And I'm Nick Day, and we hope you will join us again in our next episode of Mindful Paths.